Carcassonne has both Gallic and Muslim origins, while its iconic walls include structures from both Roman times and the era of Napoleon III, that is, the 19th century. So this sentence, which sounds like a rather strange soup worthy of an outgoing deputy lacking voters, can actually be explained simply by the incredible history of the city that I invite you to discover today. The city of Carcassonne has its roots in a 6th century before Christ Gallic oppidum, situated on the hill where the impressive citadel remains standing to this day. But its history is far from peaceful. The oppidum is often involved in local conflicts, resulting in the initial fortification of the hill of Carcassonne. Then it was the Romans who took over this Gallic oppidum in 118 before Christ. The city had already existed for several centuries, but it was only at that moment that the name of the city appeared in writing. The Gallic oppidum gradually became a Gallo-Roman city called Carcasso. The name of the current city, Carcassonne, originates from its Gallo-Roman roots, as you have understood. In fact, the famous legend of the noble lady Carcass, whose representations can be found, for example, within the medieval city, who is said to be the legendary Muslim wife of Lord Balak, successfully defending her city against the Frankish Emperor Charlemagne, and thus giving the city its name, is historically false. But it is nevertheless based on a context that is indeed real, and you will soon understand how Carcassonne can have both Gallic and Muslim origins. However, to go from the Gallo-Roman city to the Muslim city, a lot had to happen. Carcassonne needed economic significance to be influential and secure its place in Roman Empire history. This is how the Pax Romana, the Roman peace enjoyed by regions controlled by the Roman Empire, lasted for about 200 years, which will allow the city to flourish and take an important place in the region. However, from the late 3rd century AD, particularly during the 4th century, the frequent unrest in the Roman Empire and the region led local leaders to construct the first stone fortifications around the city. In fact, some of these Roman fortifications are still visible today, testifying to their structural quality and strategic importance. To understand why towers come in various shapes like round, square, and horseshoe-shaped, as seen in these Roman towers, I made a video on this topic, which I'll share at the end of this documentary. But how did the Gallo-Roman Carcassonne give rise to a legend featuring a Muslim lady, Carcass, opposing the Frank? The primary reason for this is the gradual disappearance of the Western Roman Empire. In the 5th century, the Visigoths settled in the region and held the city during a turbulent period. Regular conflicts occasionally interrupted this rule when the city was taken. However, the Visigothic kingdom's sudden and unexpected fall marked a decisive turning point in the city's history. In the early 8th century, the Islamic Caliphate, now reaching the Strait of Gibraltar, launched a raid on Spain. This raid exposed the frailty of the Visigothic kingdom, causing its collapse within months. As a result, and even though it was located at the very north of the Visigothic kingdom, the city fell into the hands of the Caliphate for 27 years starting in 725. In 752, Pepin the Short, son of Charles Martel and father of Charlemagne, seized the city. 6 years later, in 759, he completed the total conquest of Septimania region. The captivating 12th century legend of Lady Carcass, the creativity of the troubadour, according to some authors, or local oral traditions in the 16th century, according to others, marked the origin. It draws on this context to attribute a legendary origin to the name of the city. However, this first part of the city's history explains its name and origin, but not why it is so powerfully fortified today, surrounded by 2 layers of ramparts. So why did people go to so much trouble to protect Carcassonne? At the end of the 11th century, a dynasty that played a central role in the city's history took control of it. It was the powerful Trincavel dynasty. It was through his mother that the noble Bernard Aton IV Trincavel, who ruled over Albi and Nimes, also inherited the viscounties of Carcassonne and Béziers. It was thanks to this medieval dynasty that the city experienced significant growth. Thus, the Cathedral of Carcassonne was built during this period, that is, at the end of the 11th century. The castle, still visible today, was started in the 12th century and adapted over time. Lords granted land to meet military and civil needs. The current context is characterized by an economic boom alongside an unstable environment. This encourages the Trincavels to protect the city as best as possible, utilizing the surviving Roman structures. By the late 1100s, Catharism, a dissident Christian branch that emerged around 1000 AD in Western Europe, was gaining traction within what is now known as Occitania. Helped by the so-called permissive attitude of the Count of Toulouse and his powerful vassal, Raymond Roger Trincavel, Viscount of Carcassonne, Crusade, Albi, Ambialais, and Béziers. Despite being Catholics, they displayed tolerance towards the Cathar movement, and even the Jews, who often faced terrible mistreatment in the Middle Ages. The term Cathar comes from the Greek katharos, meaning clean or pure, and without delving into the interesting Cathar spirituality, since we are dealing with history here. The Cathar movements, while inspired by Christianity, present concepts and ideas that differ significantly from Catholic worship, which was the dominant branch of Christianity in the West at the time, and at the head of which was the Pope. In reality, the Church entered the region gently, not forcefully like a brute. There were several attempts at conciliation to find a peaceful solution, as well as attempts to convert the Cathars. This approach was more tolerated than supported by the local lords, who were quite tolerant toward the Cathar movement. As a result, these conciliation efforts were largely unsuccessful, and it was in 1208 that Pope Innocent III, considering the Cathar movement to be heresy, called for a crusade against the Cathars, as well as, and this is important, against the lords who protect them, or should we say tolerate them even if they are Catholic. And so the lords from the north of the Kingdom of France responded to the call with enthusiasm, motivated as much by religious reasons as by political and economic ones, and they put together a substantial army. In response to this display of power, the Count of Toulouse, recognizing the threat and being practical, quickly reconciles and essentially deserts the Cathars. However, Raymond Roger Trincavel, the Lord of Carcassonne and other lands, continues seeking a compromise. He pleads his case to the legate pope and crusaders. He unambiguously reaffirms his loyalty to Catholicism, but is unable to compromise with the crusaders. The latter demand total submission from the Viscount and the handing over, or at minimum the banishment of the Cathars, which Trincavel refuses. That's when the region will plunge into chaos. In July 1209, the siege of Béziers begins, whose defenders have received enough to hold out for 40 days to allow Viscount Trincavel to return with a relief army. However, this plan quite literally falls through as a result of a, let's say, totally botched sortie by the defenders. Some of them, seeing some crusaders quenching their thirst in the river running alongside the city, think they can take advantage of the situation to settle the score with them and strike a blow to their enemies' morale. But the poorly organized sortie is quickly overwhelmed by the crusaders, causing a totally disorganized and panicked retreat by the people of Béziers. Disaster arises from this disorder when the crusaders exploit the confusion to enter the city. 3 hours after this failed sortie, the fall of the city is confirmed and is followed by a terrible massacre of the population, without regard to the age or sex of the individuals. According to the admission of the papal legate Arnaud Amaury himself, who even boasts about it in a report. In August 1209, the Crusaders arrived at Carcassonne, defended by Viscount Trincavel himself. But there will be no battle. Informed of the fate reserved for Béziers, the city negotiates. After securing a guarantee to spare its inhabitants, Carcassonne surrendered following a brief 15-day siege. As agreed, the inhabitants are spared but forced out of the city, and nearby towns are set ablaze. Viscount Trincavel is captured. The confiscated lands are entrusted to the brilliant, ambitious, and brutal French nobleman Simon de Montfort, Count of Montfort-l'Amaury and Leicester. However, Carcassonne does not immediately find peace as the crusade and unrest in the region continue to rage for several more years. Simon de Montfort dies in battle in 1218 during the siege of Toulouse. His son, Amaury de Montfort, inherits Carcassonne. But the young Amaury simply cannot impose his authority over the possessions he inherits in the region. He is gradually driven out of his cities until Carcassonne is threatened by the Count of Toulouse. In 1224, Sir de Montfort decides to relinquish his rights to Carcassonne. In favor of the King of France, Louis VIII, the Lion becomes the new prestigious owner of the place, potentially bringing peace to the city. But it is at this moment that the Trincavel reappear and attempt a very bold move. Exploiting a confusing transition between Amaury de Montfort and royal authorities, Raymond II Trincavel regains control of the city with help from the Count of Toulouse. But this return of the city's historic viscounts does not last. In 1226, the French king joins the ongoing crusade, with periodic lulls aiming to subdue the region definitively. Louis VIII, known as the Lion, and his successor Louis IX, later Saint Louis, seized Carcassonne and fortified its defenses. By order of Saint Louis, the King of France, the city's second wall was built and tested as early as 1240 against, well, guess who? Raymond II Trincavel had no intention of giving up. Nevertheless, the defenses barely hold, and Raymond Trincavel is forced to give up his titles for good. I have good news for you. Just like Carcassonne, the city can finally breathe a little. Over the next 10 years, the city's defenses are steadily strengthened, ensuring no one dares to besiege the citadel anymore. This persists until the end of the Middle Ages, often at the expense of nearby towns, including during the 100 Years' War. In the 16th century, the city faced turmoil from the religious wars while continuing its military role. But while the city of Carcassonne had until then enjoyed renewed and well-established prosperity, it began a gradual decline in the 17th century in favor of the surrounding towns, which were more suited to development and the new realities of the time. Over the decades, the upper city slowly loses its residents and establishments. Consequently, the walls and castle are not maintained and gradually fall into ruin. The medieval city falls asleep on its hill while the new and modern city of Carcassonne awakens on the banks of the Odie. Centuries later, as the Sleeping Beauty faces destruction, she meets her Prince Charming, who aims to revive her life and colors. In the 1800s, the city's severe neglect and decay led to discussions about demolishing it. But she is first saved from her fate by Jean-Pierre Croix, the old mayor, and then restored. Beginning in 1853, architect Eugène Viollet-Le-Duc left his stylistic and historical interpretation on the city, all with the approval of Napoleon III. Under its new colors, the medieval city of Carcassonne has been protected as a historic monument since 1862, thus allowing it to reach us, rich in its history as well as its vibrant present. Thank you to those of you who follow the channel. I hope this made you want to discover or rediscover the city, and I hope I earned a thumbs up from you. With that, I have a question for you. Do you know why some castle towers are round and others are rectangular? No? I answer that in the next video.